Hey folks, glad you could join us on yet another conversation on Business Redefined, your weekly most comprehensive look at the world of business, finance and economics. Now, we kicked off 2025 with a series of conversations on artificial intelligence, that's AI, and how it is disrupting the business environment. We want to venture into that conversation again and focus on artificial intelligence and data centers, a nexus which definitely Africa, Kenya, and the wider global south cannot ignore because of the impact it is having on day-to-day living. And to help us make sense of this, we have Adil El Youssefi, Chief Executive Officer, Africa Data Centers. Welcome on set.
Thank you, Julius.
You are most welcome, sir. For those of us who are familiar with seeing you under the Liquid Telecom umbrella, please help us understand Cassava Technologies, Africa Data Centers, and Liquid Telecom.
Sure. Well, Cassava Technologies is the premier technology company in Africa. We actually have several assets and several companies operating in more than 20 countries on the continent. The largest of that business is Liquid Intelligent Technologies, where we operate the largest fiber network of sub-Saharan Africa, around 120,000 kilometers of fiber across 12 countries. And then we have other businesses, cloud and cybersecurity, fintech, and data centers under the brand Africa Data Centers. Cassava Technologies is really born and bred African company founded by our chairman, Mr. Strive Masiwia, out of Zimbabwe.
Great. Glad to have you on set now. Let's get into the subject we want to prosecute tonight. When you talk about AI needs a home, that's artificial intelligence, and of course, the argument here it is we shouldn't just be thinking of it within the confines of cloud. Help us make sense of this.
Sure. Well, whenever you access an application or a data, that data is stored somewhere on a physical medium, and that application is running on a computer, on a processor, in a physical medium again. So when we say cloud, we just mean that it's located somewhere that it's not necessarily defined for you as a user. But that cloud could be in Nairobi, it could be in Kisumu, it could be in London or in New York. And when we speak about AI, it's no different from any other IT applications. It requires storage and processing power to store the data and a processing power to process the AI algorithm that is actually working on that data. And this is what we mean by data centers being the home of AI. Data centers now actually have is a location, a secure location, an available location where the data is stored and the processors are also stored to make use of that data.
A couple of weeks ago, Adil, when I was moderating at the United Nations General Assembly, we had a very heated conversation around AI sovereignty and the fact that for us, especially those from the global south, we need to agitate or table a case for our data, and especially for AI purposes, to be housed within our geographies. Is that something tending towards what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is a matter of critical importance for us in Africa and for any nation for that matter. AI is the future. There will be no future without AI. AI will define everything we do in our lives, from education to work to health to defense. And from that perspective, if you look at it from that lens, any industry, any government must have an AI agenda around what needs to be within our control, so to speak, and what can be on the cloud, to the previous point, what can be actually located somewhere else. As always, the answer is always in between, right? We have to define what we require to be housed within our borders and what we can afford to have elsewhere. The perspective that we are taking as Africa Data Centers and as Cassava Technologies is that we should have assets pertaining to digital infrastructure and digital services that allow Africa to harness the tremendous potential that AI brings. And from that perspective, we need data centers. Africa Data Centers currently operates one of the largest setups on the continent. We have over 30 megawatts of data center capacity across 5 locations, 3 countries. Kenya, we're the market leader. South Africa, where we have 3 data centers across Johannesburg and Cape Town, and Lagos, Nigeria. We have, as I said before, our network business and our cloud and cybersecurity business. So these components allow us with others to make sure that Africa can discuss its future data sovereignty through the AI sovereignty by having the right digital infrastructure and the right digital services apparatus.
Why is it that we don't seem to be doing data centers in Africa at scale? If you compare it with other jurisdictions, I mean, we are, if I could say, lagging behind in terms of rollout. Why is that the case?
As always, it centers around the money, right? I mean, investments in data centers require a significant amount of capital. A megawatt, which is basically a unit that we use to try to measure the amount of IT workload that a data center can provide to its customers. A megawatt costs between $10 to $12 million to deploy, right? just one, right? So you can calculate quickly, roughly, the amount of investment that we have made just at Africa Data Centers to be one of the leading operators on the continent. But to your point earlier, the West is currently talking about gigawatts setups, right? 5 gigawatts, 10 gigawatts, hundreds of megawatts. I'm sure we will get there eventually on our continent. But we need to look at it as well as an ecosystem, right? That not only investors need, just as Africa Data Centers and Cassava Technologies come in and invest in infrastructure, but also other stakeholders in ecosystem, private sector, enterprises, public sector, governments come in and trying to make sure that demand is there to meet supply. Because we know, right? I mean, if there is demand, capital will come.
Okay. Over the last 5 years or so, we've had so much conversation on the global landscape around chip technology and especially the constraints in terms of production and where we stand currently. What's the state of play? And when we hear every time players like yourself talking about GPUs, TPUs, what are those and why should we care?
Sure. So GPUs and TPUs are basically the processors that are used to process data in the age of AI. An AI software or an AI algorithm requires a very high amount of what we call compute, which is basically a measure of how many instructions a processor or a computer can sort out in a unit of time, right? So we all had the experience of our software being a bit slow. That's your processor having too many things to handle. If you throw at it too many instructions, and AI requires a lot of instructions, right, to work, then the processor cannot handle. You need to upgrade your processor. And this is where the GPUs and the TPUs come in. Those actually form a very large part of the investment in AI, apart from it's part of the infrastructure. So we have the data centers as infrastructure, we have energy infrastructure, and we have the hardware around AI as infrastructure. And then we come to the software. So in terms of technology, obviously we know that a few players, a handful of players have emerged around the globe that are the leaders there. And in Africa we are not behind. As Cassava Technologies, we have partners with the market leader, NVIDIA, to deploy the first large-scale AI factory on the continent, which actually we will be deploying at the end of this year. We'll be deploying thousands of GPUs from NVIDIA, one of the latest generation of the GPUs, to avail what we call an AI factory.
I hope that launch is in Kenya.
Kenya is definitely in the next wave, right? So we've announced publicly that next waves for us will be Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, and Morocco.
Fantastic. AI is fast changing. No sooner we'll be talking about generative AI than we're being told about agentic AI. How do you ensure the design of data centers evolves as fast to keep pace and support the rollout?
It's a very good question. It's always a challenge, right? I mean, when you are providing a service, to make sure that you have a service that can be there for the long term, so that you can get the right returns. In terms of data centers are really the backbone of AI, because they're the home of AI, they're the home of data, right? And from that perspective, we are seeing new chips, new AI requirements. You spoke about agentic AI. Tomorrow we are talking about material or physical AI through robotics and humanoids, etc., coming online in the near future. And from that perspective, those end devices, whatever they end up being, right, they need to connect back to a farm of AI factories where you have these processors, the GPUs and TPUs and the data stored. And from that perspective, we have to make sure that our data centers and our networks are equipped to handle that amount of data, are equipped to house those latest technology GPUs or processors. And those processors tend to require large amount of power, as I said before, and from that perspective, they actually emit a lot of heat. And that heat needs to be managed, needs to be dissipated. So it poses a lot of constraint on the energy availability, on the technology set up to dissipate that heat. And what we are doing as Africa Data Centers is to make sure that we tailor our deployments to the requirement of the customer, but also to have actually in our new facilities some sort of leeway so that we can adjust, right, to the deployment that the customer needs to make.
Adi, maybe let's take a step back. Help us understand generative AI, agentic AI, and now we're talking about the physical AI.
So when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're really talking about software, right? It's really an algorithm or software that is processing large amount of data to make an output, right, with an input. And from that perspective, first we have the first generation of AI has been basically your software that can predict, right? You give it some data and that can predict the weather. It can predict maybe polls. Okay, so all of that was just the first generation. Second generation, we came to what we call large language models, the LLMs. So the LLMs are basically now a more sophisticated version of a predictive engine, right? And large language models, as their name says, have been able to ingest large amount of data. Actually, the large ones now have exhausted data available on the planet, right? And with that large amount of data, they're able to predict, to assign a probability to the next actually word or the next letter for any output that they emit, right? So with an input, for example, I'll tell them one was Adil Al-Yusufi born, they look at the data and then they can predict, right? To a certain of accuracy, my birth date. So from that perspective, these are just predictive engine that require a large amount of data. Agentic AI takes a step further. They don't just give an output, a probabilistic output. They also take autonomous decision. Based on the output, they are able to say, well, the temperature in this room is 30 degrees. I need to crack up the AC so that I can reduce it within range of 26 to 8. So they don't just input the temperature. It can be an assistant. Exactly. They make a decision, right? And we have now agentic AI deployed in many industries. And obviously the next step that we see in the future is material AI, where we have robotics, we will have robots, we will have humanoids. We could potentially even think of, as you know, what some of the global hyperscalers are looking at, devices that actually can be used, either a handheld device or maybe glasses, yes, right? Which will now combine the large language model, agentic AI, to augment human capabilities. So that's the roadmap that we see, and after that there's talk about quantum AI. So the future is exciting around all these technologies.
Exciting, promising, and also scary in one way or another. You've mentioned a lot about emission of a lot of heat. We need cooling systems. Let's talk about data centers, AI, and sustainability. Do you experience a challenge when it comes to that consideration?
Absolutely. I mean, as we know, one of the big issues that humanity is facing is global warming and the impact that our civilization has on our home, our Mother Earth, right? So any industry has a sustainability agenda, and at Cassava Technologies, Africa Data Centers, we have been one of the pioneers in sustainability from our inception, because we are from Africa. We do business in a sustainable way. Otherwise, we can't have a business for the long run. So from the perspective that data centers and technology requires a large amount of energy and dissipates a lot of heat, right? By using this energy and also using these very powerful technology machines, it's important that we have sustainability as part of the business strategy. And here I believe Africa has a lot of asset to offer compared to other parts of the world. We have an abundance of renewable energy, be it solar, be it thermal, as we see in Kenya, be it hydraulic. We have also a very community-based way of doing business, right? Where whichever business we deploy, we always involve the community so that we can see how the community can benefit. So as Africa Data Centers, we are extremely focused on making sure that this deployment that we're making on our data centers have a strong sustainability aspect into them. For example, in our current data center here in Nairobi, which is the largest, we have around 4 megawatts of IT workload or IT capacity in it. 20% of that power is coming from renewable energy, solar panels that we have deployed not only on the facility, but in the vicinity of the facility. This is obviously on top of the fact that, for example, Kenya has north of 95% of its energy in the grid as green, makes actually our setup here in Kenya extremely appealing for customers who are very focused on ensuring that deploy in locations that have a renewable energy aspect to their offering. So we need to look at this as an asset that our continent has in this AI revolution that we're seeing.
You know, we began our conversation, Adil, by talking about why we're not seeing this taking place at scale in Africa. And you mentioned, of course, the resource constraints are a significant challenge here. But when you look at what you've just said, for example, Kenya, 95% of the grid is green, and therefore, shouldn't investors looking into this market from a data center perspective think maybe it's not just ROI in the commercial terms, there is a sustainability aspect to it which lends itself easily?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a big part of the answer, right? When we provide that sustainability lens, right? But it's not sufficient, right? Because capital needs returns, right? So it's one part of the puzzle, but we need to align the other parts. Demand is a big one, again, in any industry. And I feel, to the point you made earlier, Julius, around sovereignty of data. Sovereignty just means that we make sure that for certain applications, like defense, for example, like health, we have strict data requirements for those data to be housed within country and those applications within country. And we've seen actually several governments within the continent considering this or looking at it. We've seen it recently in the US and in Europe, where many countries have enacted this strict data residency laws. So I believe if we drive those considerations where they are relevant, right? If we drive more digitalization of our economies, right? If we continue bringing more services online, be it public services or private services online, if we continue trying to create more data or an environment that can enable more technology startup to flourish, we'll see the amount of data generated rise and the amount of data that needs to be housed within our countries rise. And from that perspective, we will see investors doubling down on the potential that Africa has to offer.
Adil, from a use case perspective, the bulk of what I see, and maybe this is a very subjective view, is uptake of AI data centers in the financial services, banking, insurance. I don't see much of it happening in other sectors. Are you seeing the same thing, and what could be the inhibiting factor here?
Well, in our economies in Africa, the financial sector has been doing extremely well, right? Because obviously there is a large population that needs to have access to capital, access to investment. And from that perspective, this industry has the means, right, to invest in technology, because technology can make their businesses more efficient. And we were talking just before we started about a use case, for example, which is very important and has had a lot of success around fraud detection within the financial sector. But what we see on top of the financial sector are two major sectors that are taking off. The first one is education, right? So education, you can think of, you have your own AI tutor, right, with you for whichever subject you're looking at. Obviously, that can significantly reduce the cost of providing quality education to the population, and from that perspective, bring in our next generation, our sons and daughters, with much more capabilities that we could otherwise have offered. Then we have health. Health is another use case that we see a lot of applications geared toward. Right, health is really about making the right diagnosis, right, and providing the right cure. So using AI systems to improve the capability of our doctors and nurses to treat patients is also a very trending use case. These are the mass market use cases that we see, but finally, the private use case, as mentioned, is defense, right? I mean, for defense considerations, AI can also provide significant advantages.
All right. Two final questions, Adil. The first one is, if I'm a business leader and I'm looking at this subject of AI data centers, what should I be thinking about in terms of priority considerations for an infrastructure partner?
I think the first and foremost consideration is the level of trust, right, that you want to put with the partner. As I mentioned, as Africa Data Centers, we run one of the largest facilities across the continent and the largest in Kenya. We've been in this business for the last 15 years because you're basically making decision to house your most critical data and applications in a secure state-of-the-art facility so that you can focus on your core business. So really, can you trust the partner that you intend to work with? Second is basically to look at it holistically, not only from an infrastructure perspective, but also from an application perspective. What is it that the organization needs to actually achieve out of this technology investment, right? Is it reduction of cost? Is it better customer service? Is it a new product? Is it a combination? Because I believe the discussion needs to be actually about the outcome that the customer or the organization wants to achieve. And the partners such as Cassava Technologies can now guide and say, well, actually for this use case, maybe housing data within Kenya makes sense, or within South Africa makes sense, or you go to the public cloud, or you can do a combination of both.
Okay. Final question. If you were to give advice to African governments, what would be your policy imperative with regard to the topic we have had around AI and data centers?
Well, I wouldn't want to venture to say that I want to give advice to our governments. Our governments are already doing a great job and have many advisors and multi-year plans around technology. I mean, our technology sector, for example, in Kenya is a force to reckon with, an example to many countries, not only on the continent but across the world. That being said, from the perspective of AI penetration within our economies, AI cannot survive without two things: digital infrastructure and services infrastructure, or digital services. Digital infrastructure, it's really about data centers and about the network. Digital services, it's really about the availability of data. So what we need to do within Africa is to really invest on these three pillars. How can we make sure that we have an environment where the power cost is competitive, because data centers need a competitive power input? How can we have an environment where the investment in fiber networks to connect these data centers can be made in a cost-effective way, so reducing the cost of doing business, the interruptions that can happen to the network, the vandalism, etc. Those things need to be addressed. And third is the availability of data. How can we infuse data generation in our economies? How can NTV infuse data generation in its programming, right? How can we infuse data generation in health, in education, in transportation, etc.? With data, if the data is available, then the algorithm can come and actually create use cases, create insights out of data so that our roads are safer, our healthcare is more efficient, our education is better for our citizens.
Adil El Youssefi, the Chief Executive Officer of Africa Data Centers, and we have been focusing on the subject of AI and data centers, and why we need to prioritize consideration of an enabling environment for this to take root, because it catalyzes enterprise, catalyzes service delivery, and of course that is something which we all need in our economy. Stay tuned to Business Redefined for this and more as and when it unfolds.